Now let's get some post-summit analysis from an expert on North Korea. I'm delighted to say that law professor Song Se-ryeon from Kyung Hee University is joining me this evening in the studio. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Professor.
Good to be here.
We are some 48 hours past the abrupt end of the Hanoi summit now. No deal was signed, but the two sides didn't leave on particularly bad terms. What comes next in regards to these negotiations?
Well, as you mentioned, both parties did not end in breakup terms or in a kaboom kind of breakup. I think we can take it as a part of the negotiation process. It's an optimistic view, but also I think it's a realistic view. From that standpoint, the next is to address the issues that have come up. The issues that come up as President Trump has even pointed out, that it has become crystal clear as to what both parties want at this point and where the differences are. From the get-go, there were some confusions as to whether North Korea and U.S. has a similar or the exactly shared notion of the denuclearization, and also how to go about it. So at this point, I think both parties understand where the hang-ups are. So the key is that the devil is in the details. I think that is becoming truer and truer. There has to be more working level negotiations and zeroing in on the points that have come up and has been crystallized.
Does North Korea's request for this massive elimination of sanctions suggest to you that the regime could be in much greater economic peril than we all originally thought?
Well, I think that we all knew that they were progressively getting worse because of the sanctions, and the projection of the GDP shows that it has gotten worse. So they're in no way in any comfortable situation at this point, and because of that, North Korea's #1 priority has been for quite a while to address the sanctions issue. I think that's why they desperately wanted it. And they thought that by giving up Yongbyon facilities, it would be a palatable give and take with the U.S., but U.S. wants more fundamental and more crystallized form of denuclearization at this point.
Now, few people expected denuclearization to happen overnight. It's always going to take a lot of time, lots of talks, lots of working level negotiations, and incremental steps to get there. However, President Trump's critics are framing the Hanoi summit as a Trump failure. That's what we're hearing in certain parts of the US mainstream media. How do you rate President Trump's handling of the meeting in Hanoi?
Well, I think it's certainly a setback, but I wouldn't go as far as failure. And going back to the premise that this is part of the longer negotiation process, as you pointed out, the setting up a peace regime that has an economic component to it and also security component to it in Korean Peninsula is a very complex matter. And it takes a laborious amount of work and a lot of details. So I don't mind that it takes too long. I don't mind that it takes this much. I think that what would come next is that the U.S. and North Korea will work out the details. But in doing so, there will be a lot of tug of war between that. My guess is that the President Trump wouldn't think of this as a failure, maybe a setback, but a setback that he probably wouldn't mind. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because of the negotiation styles that Donald Trump has exhibited and wrote a book about it, he wants to have a mindset and the willingness to always walk away, get up and walk away. Yeah. That gives him a stronger suit. And also, he wants to portray to the other side that time is on his side. What better way to demonstrate it by walking away from this and, make certain uncertain situations so that if North Korea wants it badly enough, then they'll come back and to agree to more of concessions.
Yeah, it's what we just reported prior to our conversation here, that Son-hee, a senior North Korean diplomat, admitted that Kim Jong-un was rather surprised by President Trump's negotiating style, even though they must have studied his style over the years before going into these meetings. But President Moon Jae-in is very heavily invested in keeping these negotiations on track. I'm not suggesting they've gone that far off track anyway. But he's pushing to meet with President Trump at a point in the very near future. He wants to meet face to face so they can discuss the next steps in this process. Is it business as usual for President Moon in regards to his peace drive, his reaching out to North Korea, or do you think it's time now that he's going to have to rethink how he goes about approaching Pyongyang?
Well, I don't think he has anticipated this breakdown of the talk, so it's a surprise to him too. But it also gives him an opportunity to assert himself, to be in the middle of the process, sort of like these two, the bigger-than-life personalities, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, very precarious and very unpredictable. Somebody has to be an adult in the room to get those people in the table. I think that he has played that role, but I think going forward, his role might be a little bit bigger if we want to make this a successful session or the deal, because it's not just North Korea and the nuclear issue or the Donald Trump's want in his career as a president. I think it has to do with what kind of peace regime that can last and sustainable can be established in Korean Peninsula. From Kim Jong-un's point of view, several years down the road, there will be a new president in the White House, new president in the Blue House, and there's no guarantee at this point that those people would be favorable to even to talk to him. So, wishing that he don't want to be a next Gaddafi even, I think he wants to have a certain airtight kind of regime or the plan in place. If not, his last resort is always to keep holding on to the nuclear weapons. So in that sense, in order to address all those issues, the solutions has to be more creative, it has to be more detailed, and I think in that sense, working level negotiations and addressing all those different parts and bringing in all those players, including China, I think would be very, very important going forward.
Yeah, it would be nice to see in the future, perhaps, if we could have a three-way summit with President Moon there with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump, and perhaps later down the line even Chinese President Xi Jinping being there, but perhaps that's not too realistic at this point. But given what happened in Hanoi, let's talk about the various inter-Korean economic projects that are at the very early stage. You could say some haven't really even gotten started yet, but there are ambitious plans for restarting some tour programs to North Korea, reopening the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and even connecting road and rail links between the two Koreas. Where do you think they stand after this summit in Hanoi? Do you think they're still going to be able to slowly move ahead?
Well, to the extent that U.S. and also United Nations think that the sanction has been the integral part of bringing North Korea to the table and to this stage, the sanction regime will continue, and because of that, the inter-Korean relationship, economic cooperation has to be put on the shelf. But I think that we can use this opportunity to kind of make it more concrete as to what we will do once the floodgate opens. I mean, we can always go back to Kaesong, which we have done before. Kumgang, the tour projects, probably it's not difficult to get back to where we were. But we were talking about, the President Moon actually was talking about the much bigger vision that includes many different countries. So I think before we get into any kind of sanction forbidden areas, he can always talk to other nations as to what could be the future prospect and get the excitement level up. I think that that'll help getting to the notion to the Kim Jong-un to deliver the message that once this sanction regime can be taken off, probably he should be excited about moving from military-focused the strategies in the future to the more economic-focused ones. So in that sense, President Moon can do a lot of activities, diplomatic and economic activities with a lot of partners around us.
Going back to U.S.-North Korea relations then, what do you think it would take for Pyongyang and Washington to actually hammer out a long-term deal regarding all the issues they have with one another?
One of the disappointments that many experts have pointed out is that if there were to be a big deal this time around, there should have been a lot more activities in the working levels. And that was curiously lacking. So in that sense, this is a time to kind of go back to that level and look at the various issues that has not been resolved or haven't been tabled, and go back to the kind of a drawing board and hammer out a kind of more thicker book as to what needs to be done next. I think that, again, going back to the theme of the devil is in the details, I think we have to kind of hunker down and really put in some elbow grease and the laborious hours on the tables and burn the midnight oils between the working groups.
Now, assuming that there will be a third North Korea-U.S. summit, do you think there will be one, perhaps before the 2020 presidential election in the United States?
Well, just stepping back, I think both sides want it for different reasons. Donald Trump wants it for re-election and for his legacy as a presidency. He's under a tremendous amount of pressure from the investigations, lower house and the Democrats' side. So he wants to have one significant big victory, and probably that might be the reason why he doesn't want to have a kind of meager victory this time around, and instead he will take time to get the substantial victory down the road. But he wants it before the re-election, and that could present the opportunities for North Korea because they want it badly as well, not only economically, but this has always had a point of a survivability of the regime anyway. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet with this equally very unpredictable president in the United States who's willing to talk to him and sit down with him twice already. So if there's a third time, I think there will be a third time because both sides want it. If they are prepared enough, probably we will have a kind of breakthrough, a historic breakthrough going forward.
I mean, if there was a big breakthrough in Hanoi, there's still 18 months to go before the election. It would be out of the mind somewhat of the American voters. So perhaps if he can seal a deal with North Korea closer to November 2020, that's looking at it longer term, that might be the strategy for the domestic political audience. In the meantime, though, do you expect President Trump to lean more on China? Do you think he has much leverage over the Chinese, considering he has these trade agreements going on, to get them to use their substantial influence over Pyongyang? We can argue over how much influence they actually do have over Kim Jong-un, to make the Chinese say to the regime, look, you are going to have to soften your stance if we're ever going to reach a deal here.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting question because Kim Jong-un might be visiting President Xi Jinping pretty soon. And from the negotiations point of view, when you walk away from a deal, you always have to have an alternative. And North Korea, for a long time, has considered China as kind of a white knight or alternative in any kind of arrangement. So I think that Donald Trump would think that they have to contain China first, not to be on the side of the North Korea too much in this negotiation process. And he has a pretty good leveraging point because of, as you mentioned, trade talks that they have. So this is a kind of a multi-dimensional chessboard where they are all important pawns having a very big role to play. So it will be interesting to see what kind of messages that Trump wants to deliver to Xi Jinping to be on the favorable side of the deal, but how strongly he does it. But at the same time, what kind of the crying voice that Kim Jong-un would have to keep the Uncle Xi on his side so that going forward, the negotiation would be to his advantage.
Yeah, such a complex situation with lots of moving parts, as you alluded to there. Final question before we let you go, so you can enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. With the Hanoi summit behind us now then, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic about the North Korea issue than you were a few days ago before the leaders met in the Vietnamese capital?
Let me say that I'm not less pessimistic about it. Certainly, I'm not more optimistic. It's a setback, and there's always a danger that something happens externally so that next the summit does not come or come too late. But at the same time, going back to if this is a modus operandi of the Donald Trump to get the better result, and that presumes that he is very much invested and committed to making a deal, and he wants to meet again, and that's why his lavish praise on the Kim Jong-un to an extent of silliness. I'm in love, and they're friends, and all those. I think it indicates that there is a much room for optimism to have the third summit, maybe fourth summit. I don't know how long it'll take, but as I said before, we need to have the details down, and that requires not just looking at Kim Jong-un and Trump and whether they will meet again or not, but how often the working groups meet and how substantively they hammer out the issues that has been not been resolved so far.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I did just want to ask you one quick question that came to mind. In your view, from the viewpoint of how this process will move forward, do you think it would be better if President Trump wins a second term? Are you worried that this process might go back to square one if the Democrats take the White House in 2020? I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but considering what's happened under the Trump administration, it's kind of hard to argue that the progress has been rather remarkable from the brink of what many were thinking might have been a seriously large conflict, potentially nuclear conflict between North Korea and the United States, to this point where we've gone over 400 days without North Korea testing any nuclear bombs or firing any missiles.
Right. From the standpoint of having the consistency, having a same regime or same leader would help. But I think the more fundamental and more concrete solution is to have a regime, peace regime already established in the Korean Peninsula, and that does not really require any leader, any particular leader on the top.
Okay, well, we always appreciate your time, Professor Song, and once again, thanks for coming in. Great insights as per usual, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you again soon. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.